So, what is gouache? Gouache is one of the most versatile mediums out there. It can be used like oil or acrylic paint when you layer it, like in these paintings by Lena Rivo. She likes to use the paint thicker and looser. She achieves beautiful textures and blended gradients. Her gouache work could be mistaken for oil or acrylic paint. Or it can be used like watercolors when you water it down, like in Vanessa Gilling's work. Her gouache pieces can be easily mistaken for watercolor, but the bigger grains of texture give it away. Or it can be a combination of the two ways of painting, like in Audra Auclair's gorgeous work. Notice how beautifully she blends the colors, which gives it an oil painting effect, but she also uses it like watercolor, especially in backgrounds. The result is super magical and surreal. All of this is done with one medium, gouache. This is all possible because gouache is almost the same as watercolor, which is finely ground pigment and water-soluble binder. The only difference with gouache is the pigment is now ground as fine, but there is much more of it, or it has white pigment or chalk added in, which makes it opaque. For this reason, it has a nickname of opaque watercolor. This makes layering easy, and if you paint with it watered down, you get the same effects as watercolor. You can use any technique you normally would with watercolors. Gouache will act almost exactly the same, but unlike watercolors, the fear of making mistakes is greatly diminished since it's easy to paint over any mistake you make. Since you can layer it, you have the freedom to paint from light to dark or dark to light. Also, gouache tends to sit on top of the page instead of going within, so you can paint it on almost any surface you want. Since it's opaque, you can also paint it on dark or tinted papers. Gouache can also be re-wet at any time in a dry painting because it is water-soluble, which makes it easy to rework a piece even after it's dry. But if this is something you don't like, you can always use acrylic gouache, which has all the same properties of normal gouache while it's wet, but once it's dry forever, which has its ups and downs. Like for example, you cannot re-wet the paint on your palette to use it again, and you'll have to scrape it off to wash it. But layering is much easier, and you don't have to worry about reactivating the layers below. We'll get into the details of this later. One of my favorite things about gouache is the fact that it dries matte. This makes it easy to see when your layers are dry by just checking if it's still shiny, and it makes it easy to scan or photograph. It also dries fairly quickly compared to other mediums, so it's perfect for us impatient types. But there are drawbacks like with any medium. Gouache paintings tend to be very fragile. They can easily be scratched or re-wet, but this is avoided by storing them properly or putting them in a glass frame. Also, since they can be re-wet, it can be tricky when layering. You can easily activate the layers below if you're using too much water, but this can be remedied with practice and more layers. But the drawbacks aren't that many, and you just have to practice and learn the kinks of the medium and get better at it. Just like watercolor, oil, acrylic, or any medium out there, you just have to put the time in. The trick is to keep trying and to learn by doing. It's just a skill like any other, so be sure to implement what you learn in this class by doing it yourself. My hope is by the end of the class, you'll have tons of techniques under your belt, will not only understand the medium better, but will be confident in doing your own thing with it. So let's start with the class, and keep in mind that everything I say can be adjusted to your liking. Your goal should be to play, have fun, experiment, and find your favorite way of painting and working with this magical medium. So let's jump in. Let's start with supplies.